everyone's attention that we expect building codes and regulations to shift more towards taking into account embodied carbon. So embodied carbon are it's the building emissions that occur in the materials at the stage of extracting materials, producing materials, fabricating them, transporting them to the job site. So all of that energy use and whatever fuel is used to get to that stage, that we expect in the next 10 years our building regulations to be thinking about that. And then what's happening at the end of life? Are we recycling our parts? Is there opportunity to refurbish or renew? And we see this trend taking up in some of the upcoming Washington State House bills. We've got Washington House Bill 1458 that's being reviewed in Olympia right now. It's called Reducing Embodied Emissions in Building, requirement for 30% reduction in embodied carbon. This is not passed, but we're expecting this to come. We also see this in hiring practices. More and more cities, counties, states, public entities are hiring embodied carbon experts. So I just want everyone to be aware of that trend that's coming. It's not the focus of the presentation today, but no, that's coming. How many of you are familiar with the Carbon Leadership Forum? They're out of the University of Washington. Maybe quick show of hands. Oh, good. Great. Maybe you're part of Carbon Leadership Forum. It's a group of researchers that gather data on building trends. And so they published a report in July projecting what are the estimates for the future of where we can expect the most energy intensive work to be happening. And so this is in the next 25 years, estimated percentage of total carbon emissions from Washington State building and infrastructure. Our world, we really play in this 50 to 60% area right now. That's the operational emissions. And the light yellow portion of the slide, that again represents embodied carbon emissions. So you can see we're only really most of our work, we're really only thinking about half of the pie. So just to call that to your attention. I like to think when you work on green buildings, I like to think about our work working at 3 scales. So we're thinking about materiality, where are we sourcing materials, what happens at the end of life, is it recyclable, are they healthy materials, what are we doing for adhesives and sealants, low VOC, all of that business. And then what's happening on the construction site? That's the second scale that we're doing work. Where can we make a positive impact there? And then really I want to kind of do a quick call to action to corporate commitments. So we all can hold our companies accountable to setting goals in this space and our customers. So even if it's conversations around, we're going to talk about clean buildings and all the upcoming code changes. Number one, are they aware? And then do they have targets? Are there goals? For example, we signed on to the climate pledge and we're working to electrify our fleet. We had a 5% commitment to EV and hybrid vehicles by 2025. And I can report we have exceeded that. We're at about 10% of our total vehicle fleet is either hybrid or EV. So these are the things that we can do to make an impact. And then this presentation is pretty focused on energy conservation and decarbonization, but I don't want to lose sight of the whole picture and whole package with sustainable buildings. We can think about water conservation. I think there's a trend right now with carbon and decarbonization, but we cannot lose sight about water efficiency in our buildings, indoor air quality, health, and wellness for both our technicians and fabricators out in the field, and also for our occupants who are living and working in these buildings. And this is not just a trend. What we're talking about today is not just a trend for the Pacific Northwest. We're seeing building performance standards crop up all over the country. So green represents where a building performance standard has passed. And again, building performance standard means there's some jurisdiction or entity that these buildings have to report on their operations. So they have certificate of occupancy. What happens in the first 12 to 16 months of the building's operations? So green, building performance standard passed, and then all the other blue dots, they're committed to passing a building performance standard. So this is not the Cascadia region. It really expands beyond that. And Ben's going to elaborate on what this actually means for us.
Wait, I guess you hit the wrong button. Okay, any score update? Still 1-0. Still 1-0. Okay, awesome. Why does it keep backing out? There we go. There we go. Sorry, user error. Thanks for your set. Yeah, so I'm gonna dive into the what, which is what are the Washington and Oregon energy codes and regulations that are driving a conversation. We'll learn about the background. Now, how is that translating into what we have to do every day? The kind of stuff that we have to worry about as we look in these buildings in the Puget Sound and the Pacific Northwest. So really, it kind of falls into three buckets that are driving this conversation right now. It's regulations, codes, and then corporate, environmental, social, and governance issues, shortened to ESG. So today I'll talk a little bit about Washington Clean Buildings, the Oregon Clean Buildings, also Washington State Energy Code and the Seattle Energy Code. And then we'll kind of wrap in kind of a conversation about decarbonization driven by corporate sustainability goals. Okay. Raise your hand if you think about this topic once a week or more. All right. Good. There's a lot of familiarity with it. That's great. Clean Building Performance Standard, for those of you who don't know, is a standard in Washington State that is forcing buildings to comply with energy use intensity. That's the EUI. EUI is the measure. It's the amount of energy that a building uses per square foot. The standard mandates targets that buildings have to hit, and it is starting to roll into effect over the next few years. It's broken down into buildings of different size to kind of spread out the compliance timeframes. Smaller buildings get more time to comply. There's large buildings, which are tier 1. There's smaller buildings, which are tier 2. But basically, all those buildings are going to have to, evaluate what their energy use target is and actually comply with that target by 2030, depending on the size of your building. This 2028 is just tier 1. And so there's a lot of rules and regulations around how that's done. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But broadly, step 1 is benchmarking. Benchmarking is figuring out how much your building is using right now, how much energy it's using right now. And there's a little snapshot of the compliance table. These are just 4 categories. I believe there's over 130 categories in the standard. 130. Thank you. And so any building could be a combination of those things. So it's complicated, I guess is my point. You need to look at how your building is set up, who the occupants are. You got to do some benchmarking, and then you just have to submit that to the state along with some other compliance requirements that we'll get into. So that's the Washington Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Oregon has a similar performance standard that's coming online. It's structured very similarly to Washington's. There's a couple of differences. One being that the ASHRAE standard it's based on is 2024, not 2018. So the targets over here are more aggressive. We're lower in this case. Less energy allowed. So the EUA targets are going to be lower than in Washington. Also, there's a few differences in square footage. And what you need to know about this is that in general, the compliance targets are 2 years out from where they are in Washington. So basically, Oregon is copying the Washington plan with a few changes, and they're about 2 years behind in their implementation. Okay, raise your hand if you know what Seattle BEPS is. Okay, few best hands. How many people here do work in the city of Seattle? Raise your hand. Okay, a little bit limited. Great. Well, if you work in the city of Seattle in the built environment, you need to know what this is. So Seattle Building Emissions Performance Standard is a performance standard that Seattle has passed. It's only for the city of Seattle. and it requires buildings to actually comply with emissions. So this is not energy use, this is emissions. This is really targeted at, natural gas consumption in the buildings. They are measuring it in terms of greenhouse gas use intensity, that's GHG, which is a CO2 equivalent calculation. And it is driving buildings to achieve net zero by 2045 for most commercial buildings. You get to 2050 if you're a residential building. But basically what they've done is between now and the end of 2020 or 2030, you have to actually do the calculations and submit a report to the city on what your emissions are today. And then 2031 in 4-year increments, they're actually ratcheting down what you're allowed to emit from your building over time. So basically turning the screws on the buildings every 4 years until you get down to zero. Easy. There's a few exceptions, but not many of them are acceptable long-term. They give you some short-term exceptions, but the goal is in the long run, they want you to remove fossil fuels from buildings and install heat pumps. Okay? That's the BEPS. Okay. Yeah, that's the quick version. It's complicated. And so there's a lot that goes into evaluating a building, doing calculations, and proving compliance. All right, Washington codes. Is there a gas ban in Washington? Yes. 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 Any other opinions? Say no. Okay. It's controversial, right? Technically, no. Okay. Right now, there was a citizens initiative passed that is now being held up in court. A low court threw it out because it addressed too many topics within one citizens initiative. It is now in front of the state Supreme Court. It should be heard and ruled on in 2026. In the meantime, everybody's going along business as usual, using the energy codes the way they're written, which does embrace fossil fuel and electric heat restrictions. So the way the Washington State Energy Code is written as a baseline, they do not want you to use electric resistance heat. They don't want you to use natural gas fired heat. They want you to use heat pumps. There are some exceptions. Eastern Washington, where it's colder, there's a little bit more allowance for natural gas burning appliances. But generally, for building heating and domestic water heating, we need to use heat codes. Like that's the place to start. Like I said,
There's some furrowing faces here.
yeah, furrowing faces.
Honest.
That said, that sounds like a gas ban, right? Sounds like a gas ban. But when they created the last Washington State Energy Code, they were worried about getting sued. So they created a fossil fuel compliance path. And so technically, the code allows you to use fossil fuels for your building heating and to do water heating. However, they made it difficult and painful. You still have to make your building electric ready. So you still have to put in all the same electrical infrastructure as you would if you're going to put in heat pumps. They also ask you to make your building even more energy efficient. C406 is a section of the code that addresses extra efficiency measures. Basically, they ratchet up the number of points you have to get in C406 so that in from a carbon perspective, the building will perform at the same level a gas-fired building or an electrified building. But that makes it a lot more difficult to comply. So just be aware of that. There is a path. It's challenging. It could be viable in some situations. Okay. What about Seattle? Again, Seattle's special. They passed their own energy code, their own performance standards. There's a lot to know about working in Seattle. The big one that we're seeing right now is alterations. It's the Seattle Energy Code, Section C or 503, where we are being asked to replace natural gas burning equipment. For example, filling downtown Seattle, they want to replace a boiler. We have to go in there and follow the rules in Seattle. Basically, the rules in Seattle, as written, are you need to replace that with a heat pump. That's the preferred path. C503 addresses all this. It's primarily addressing natural gas. Electric resistance. There's also little rules on air-cooled chillers. They want you to replace an air-cooled chiller with a heat pump in certain situations. There are some exceptions. They realize it's hard to jump all the way to a heat pump. So they're giving some exceptions. that include converting 50% of your system to heat pump, and also getting some temporary extensions of up to 4 years. And there's also kind of a big exception, which is if installing heat pumps in your building would trigger a massive utility upgrade that is very expensive, they will let you get out of jail. All those exceptions require you to prepare a Seattle Future Decarbonization Plan, which have to be prepared and delivered to the city along with your permit application to replace that boiler, if you want to use one of the exceptions. And it's a process. So you have to prepare a future decarbonization plan. This is a little chart that the city kind of makes me laugh because it's complicated, right? I'm not going to go through it all. City of Seattle cut this out to help you navigate the rules. Most of it, it either lands slowly replaced with heat pump or do a decarbonization plan and use one of the exceptions. So it's complicated. See me later if you want to get into the details on that. I could bore you for as long as you'd like on the details. So real quick, what is a future decarbonization plan in the city of Seattle? It's very evolved, I'll just say. It requires collaboration between electrical, structural, architectural, mechanical design disciplines to come up with a schematic level design of how you are going to convert that building to a heat pump system in the future. They say, okay, you can replace that boiler, natural gas boiler today, but in 4 years or at some other point, you have to put in a heat pump. Show us the plan now of how you do it when you have to. Basically, it's trying to force building owners to have skin in the game, that they recognize it's going to have to be done, and they understand how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, and what the impacts to the building are going to be. Okay? So you need a good team to help you put that together. With that, we can navigate the emergency need, I'd say, of replacing equipment in the buildings because these are breaking, right? So we got to figure out how to do that. Okay, that was a lot. Deep breaths. Sorry to get so deep into code.
Charlie, we've got a score update. Still
No, you're right. Okay. And by the way, if there's questions, we're going to have some time at the end. We'll kind of power through, then we'll have some time for questions. So I'm going to hand it off to David. All right, we'll talk a little bit about. I can see the game right here at Bison.
Sure, yeah, sure. We're going to switch places with me, so I don't look at the game. Okay. So how do we comply? So benchmark. And what that means, and Andrew mentioned this earlier, is Seattle's been doing this with their tune-ups for years, but basically, where does your type of building and its use type, let's call it an office building or a hospital or what have you, how does that compare to other hospitals, other office buildings of similar size? And there's a platform that we use for that. I know you can't read this. That was somewhat intentional, but it's basically the one on the far left is under their target. So that's a win for now. Remember that these mandates are revolving every 5 years. So the expectation is that what is a target number today will go down 5 years from now. So it's an ongoing sort of BDSA process for the building owners. The one in the middle is slightly over its target, and the SPAR one closest to me is an exemption. We're not really going to spend a lot of time on looking at like who's here, who's attending, and those are typically manufacturing buildings or agricultural, basically just high process buildings that have roofs over. That's kind of not a type of building that's identified by these codes. And so there's different documentation levels required for each. And we'll just, if you can cue the next one, perfect. So Energy Star Portfolio Manager is a free platform that stood up by the Department of Energy. And it is the repository of all the information for any of these clean buildings projects, whether they're in New York State or whether they're in Oregon or Washington. And so there are other asset programs that buildings may use. You may be aware of those. But this one has to be used. So you can create duplicates of information, but you have to use this one. And the Department of Commerce or the Department of Energy in Oregon also wants to have access to your account to actually audit your building. So this has been something that building owners have felt close to the chest, and they use them, they inspect them mildly, but now they're going to be under stiffer scrutiny. And so the important thing to mention for building owners, particularly, both private and public, is the necessity for a qualified person. And so here's all the potential qualifying credentials. I'm a CEM myself. We've got about 18, I've got some stats here. We've got about 18 compliance analysts. We've got 9 energy managers. We got 7 building performance administrators, 3 portfolio-based project managers, and 1 project manager who's program manager. But think about this. There's Tommy. He looks very serious. He's in the numbers, right? But this qualified person and an energy manager is one of the 6 roles that is spelled out in the code or in the law. And the consideration that it's a 5-year cycle and that the documents that are created actually are living documents and need to be refreshed and need to be amended when there's a TI or when there's an annex to the building or a use change. And so private building owners may not have a qualified person through that entire 5-year period. And so coming to a third party like ourselves and other companies is probably a good safety net so that you are keeping these documents up to snuff and you don't fall short and end up with a fine. So one of the key elements to any planning for a building is an energy management plan. So it talks about the energy that is being consumed, how it's consumed, what your future plans are for any asset changes. And this is Form A. This is the master form that is used for most buildings that need to comply in Tier 1. But what lies within the energy management plan is a regular cadence of meetings and then also an O&M program nested within the energy management plan. And I like to say this because people think that these state mandates have come out as an energy mandate, and we're trying to, yes, they are trying to reduce energy, but the biggest gap analysis that they did was that O&M programs generally were not followed as they should have been. And so buildings have been drifting or they've been falling short. Now, none of you in this room are, part and parcel of that. It's all the people that aren't here are doing that. So it's an O&M program hosted by the Department of Commerce or the Department of Energy in Oregon. So it's about you. It's about the work that you do. And so you get to document this. You get to be invested in what the O&M plan is for the unique building that you're maintaining. And this gets revisited ideally quarterly, at least annually, but I would say quarterly because so much changes in the building over the course of the year. Dixon. Here is just an example of what MacDonald Miller can produce for unique buildings, customize it as they wish, but it gives all of the nuts and bolts, all the data, all the minutia that Ben is so good at combing through and finding the solutions for, presentable to various stakeholders. Facility managers, yes, but C-suite, CFOs, investors in portfolios of buildings, they want to know this from an ESG standpoint, but they also now, the states want to know this. So this is a great way to package it. And then kind of bring it back to decarbonization and the state and city laws that we're having to follow. It does really require a holistic approach, and not just for what's in front of us, but really for decades to come. So consider the regulations. There are constraints, and talked about them. We could talk further today about them. All right. Yeah, so nobody gets scarred. So there's pricing, there's rebates, there's CapEx that you need to consider, and just normal deferred maintenance. But we also need these technologies and these thoughts to be embracing of future technology that isn't even here today. So that's like the concept of a central plant. And so what creates heat or cooling today might change. So how can we build that in future-proof a plant that we're maintaining today, but these buildings are expected to last 50 or 100 years. And it's maybe you have this coming out, so I'm not going to steal your thunder. But we want to minimize impacts. And some of the impacts, thank you, are things are getting bigger, they're getting heavier. Structural starts coming into it. If we've got to drop heat pumps on roofs, that might not be good. Capacity of power, we talked about that. They're louder. Sometimes sighting issues were an issue. Defrost cycles. I mean, it's good. But with that, we return it back.
I think David cued me up well, but to think about the future. And I hope that most buildings are constructed to last 50 to 100 years, but I don't think so. So on the next slide, let's just picture ourselves in 2055, 30 years from now, your age plus 30, maybe, maybe you're retired, or maybe, you've mentored the next generation of technicians and, professionals in the workforce. What do you want if you work in facilities? What precedent do you want to set for yourself in terms of O&M planning? How has that been maintained over the next 30 years? I think building performance standards can help us with some of the paperwork, but it really takes the people to help enforce it and maintain it. And a reminder that the most sustainable building is one that already exists. So I talked about embodied carbon earlier, and reports keep coming out. It's not demo everything, try to refurbish, recycle. Do we have a report, score update? Same. Okay. I'm seeing some sad faces. We're on the edge of our seat. And, really explore what that can look like in your facilities of just maintaining what's already there. Salvage, recycle, and then there's really need for more innovation. So we don't know what the future of energy holds in the next 50 years. Maybe this isn't the right audience for it, but we do need more financial incentives to pull off these buildings. Decarbonization planning is expensive. A transition off of fossil fuel doesn't work for all of our customers. We've still got some unreliable and inconsistent power for some of our customers. I bet you didn't think you'd hear that from the sustainability person talking about decarb, that it's electrification isn't always a perfect fit, but we are here to solve problems for our customers and help them on this very complex journey. And so we need bold ideas. We need everyone speaking up, collaborating together, and more financial incentives.
Yeah, so as we close things up here today, really it boils down to three things. That's staying informed, because regulations and codes are changing weekly, daily, monthly, annually. And so really stay informed. The next one is, everything is really code driven. Some has passed, some has not, as been said. So understanding where we're really at in that cycle of requirements and applications is really key. And then finally, partner with someone who understands this, because it's really complex. There's a lot here, and it's ever changing. So find a trusted advisor that you have within the industry, partner up with them, and allow them to help you along this journey, because it is a journey. It continues to evolve. And so with that, we'd like to actually open up the floor for some questions, and I'll walk around like a mic and have people respond. So thank you. We got our first question.
I have a question for the men.
Yep.
We put so many heat pumps on their own. Do you see an electrical crisis in the future, and how do you handle
A crisis.
electrical power?
Power availability is your question. Is there a potential crisis there? Yeah, I think there could be. I think there's a power generation challenge and distribution challenge. What I hear from places like SCL and PSC is that it depends on where you are. There's some areas that have substations and distribution that's not maxed out, and there's other areas that it is. And it's going to take investment, like Carissa said, by utilities and governments to actually upgrade that stuff to support effective rollout. And so there could be a point in the future where there's a conflict that needs to be weighed out.
Are we doing anything to release more power? Where the power coming from? Picture I see crisis really coming up this all.
Yeah, you were talking
Yeah.
about
So, currently there are some challenges and on the lights blinking, but anyway, I could talk loud. There are some challenges as far as different locations on the grid. And so, Puget Sound Power, Tacoma Power, all of those are actually looking at that. But also looking at other alternatives. We have solar as an option. And so that's really coming in, as well as, nuclear is coming back into the conversation. I know that's what you're looking for, but that is coming back into the conversation.
Solar in the Northwest.
Well, it does apply. Really? Yeah, it works. Yeah. I'm going to walk around with the mic.
Germany is one of the least producing solar panels. Germany is one of the highest producing solar areas. They're on the same planet zone. Same planet zone light axis. So it's 100% possible. We just got to wing into it. And the other problem is we've got too many companies. The actual subsidies, like the work for electric companies, only help them build new stuff, and they don't do a lot of maintenance. And so that's one of the issues that at a political level needs to be changed too, because we're not maintaining what we have. We're just continuing to build new, and it doesn't fix the problem that we already have.
Thank you. What are the questions we got on the roamer? There you go.
I wanted to know, how does this differ with beach differ from being set of layout?
Ben, you want to answer that one?
Sure. I'll talk about the batch piece and maybe let Durissa talk a little bit more about LEED. But fundamentally, the difference there is LEED is a way to certify a building that it is achieving certain sustainability goals. It's pretty holistic in its approach, which had many things, including how a building uses water, how it uses power, how it feels for the occupants, how it sits on the site, how it's interacting with the world around it, right? So, and even down to the types of cleaning materials that are used in that building, right? So LEED is this very holistic program that you can get for your building, the plaque on the wall if you achieve it. And there's lots of different programs. BEPS is A, Seattle only, and B, only worried about building emissions. And so it is singularly focused on driving emissions from buildings down. So LEED is this big holistic program, and Seattle BEPS is working to eliminate carbon emissions from our buildings. Maybe that.
Maybe just who is involved with the LEED process versus a Seattle building emissions performance process and what that paperwork looks like. It sounded like a lot of paperwork that David talked about for Seattle BEPS, which it is, but it's pretty focused on utility bills where LEED, you really need the architect, the developer, facility manager, and it's maybe a more massive stack of paperwork over a longer period of time. That's a little more holistic. So I'm happy to chat afterwards on any of the green building certification programs. So LEED, Living Building Challenge, Net Zero, I worked on them all.
I have a big question. I just want to make a quick comment, though. For LEED for existing buildings, it's quite complementary to these programs, right? So the LEED focus is wider, but make sure the audience maybe differentiates. LEED for new construction as architects, engineers, how you design it. LEED for existing buildings is basically an operational fitness test. And if you can't meet LEED, you're probably also struggling to meet these other requirements. So they're not drastically different. It's just the scoping boundaries. No, but basically everyone's built. LEED is built off Energy Star. This is built off Energy Star. Like nobody's reinventing the Energy Star formula, right? They're just putting Christmas ornaments on. My question to you is, Washington CVPS has an energy per square foot target. Seattle, BEPS is a carbon per square foot target. I'm seeing some buildings that are okay on the energy, but not okay on the carbon. Like, how are you guys helping your clients navigate this and kind of split the difference? Because obviously you've got multiple competing programs.
Yeah, the answer is it's complicated and it's unique to every building. Because the third element of that is the code in quotations. So
How much the retrofits will be.
yeah, because like I said, the Seattle Energy Code might drive some of these things sooner than a a clean buildings require does, or even a BEPS requirement. So how we're navigating that with our customers is engaging them hopefully in the comprehensive decarbonization planning. What we do is you got to look at every building. You got to look at the age of the equipment, quality of the equipment, when, especially natural gas fired equipment, when's it going to expire, right? What's the end of life? How does that line up with the compliance dates as they ratchet in, say, for BEPS and for clean buildings? Fortunately, if you make improvements to your carbon footprint in terms of emissions, you're also going to be lowering your energy usage, right? So those are complementary to a certain degree. If you're planning to meet the Seattle BEPS, it's going to help you meet the Washington State program. In Seattle, you have to do both. But if you have to replace your boiler next year, the code might force you to take some of these steps even earlier than the programs are forcing you to. So it's complicated.
Quick follow-up. Have you guys seen any PCAs? Like, so when you buy a building, you have to do a property condition assessment. They talk about your useful lives. If I was a PCA auditor here, I'd be telling certain transaction teams, like, you guys are screwed if you buy this building, right? Because they have to do a boiler replacement. Yeah. So are you seeing this in the transaction cycle yet? Or are you guys just...
We are just initially starting to get asked that question by property managers who are looking at buying the buildings. Literally just like last month, I had my first ask.
It's going to mess up all the due diligence.
But yeah, I've had conversations with an agency that was acquiring a building. They were acquiring a building and I wanted to see more utility bills. And they said, well, why? I said, well, because you're potentially taking on a liability. And, everyone's all jazzed to make this happen because they finally found something that fits. But I was the squeaky wheel kind of thing. And I actually found that the gas meter was not working. They had zero gas consumption and their energy peaked in August. And I said, we're a heating zone. So that is something wrong.
And one more thing to add too, your PCAs are important, but also CapEx planning. Like I think there's CapEx planning that's happening. That's just like, I have to replace this boiler in 10 years. We have to infuse these programs and the goals and the needs of these programs and a comprehensive decarbonization plan into the CapEx planning as well. Almost for like.
Feel more like for like.
Gins aren't there anyway. I mean, we can talk about it in halfways, but yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, that.
It's other questions on the forward. It was a few more minutes. Yep.
Just like we're.
What kind of incentives is Seattle getting for these buildings to come through and do this kind of work? Because now, like I said, no more like for likes, which you can throw let's just say a standard boiler back in for $200,000, let's just say. Now you're talking about changing the entire game plan, electrification, bringing power from the street, because most of the buildings downtown don't have that power set up and ready to go. So is Seattle ponying up because they're making the rules, but no one else is able to pay the bill?
Yeah.
Hold on one more second before you do that. We have bases loaded. It's Papa the Fourth. Just want to let you know, my lies. In their last cylinder. I'll keep you attained as a breast as far as what's really going on and important.
I could let anybody else, I could let anyone else address that, but briefly, there is not a lot. There's an early adopter incentive program. I have the details on top of my head, but there are some incentives for early adoption. But beyond that, there's a lot of waiting to see how it plays out. I would say there are opportunities to have custom agreements and engage in the dialogue with the city. I think they recognize that this is a grand adventure to a certain extent, and there's going to be things that need to get figured out along the way. I'm not aware of a lot of financial incentives that are going to help. And yes, it is a lot more expensive to put in a heat pump or to replace a heat pump or boiler in the heat pump.
Yeah, we are actively tracking incentives, and I would say City of Seattle Office of Sustainability and Environment, they have a handful of early adopter incentive programs. They're often targeted specifically for nonprofit and affordable housing. And in my opinion, a couple $1 million in the pot, not enough, right? When we're seeing some of these the actual construction of these decarb transitions being 8 to 10x what a like for like replacement might be. So we definitely need more incentives. So I think it's early conversations with your jurisdiction to talk about a pathway through, especially for hardship.
I might not be able to have like a lot of financial assistance, but I represent the Seattle City Light Mid Spring Rebate Program, and we have incentives for heat pumps. The other incentives for heat pump water heaters, both residentially and commercial. So you'd want to work with your distributor, whoever that may be. They're pretty much all participants in our program, and they would be the ones who guide you through the process to get the rebates in that. There is also Snohomish PUD and PSC have rebate programs. So you want to I don't represent those programs, but you would want to work with those utilities, and most likely it's you're just kidding. And Avista, oh yeah, we have Avista in the room. Yeah, so they also have a rebate program. Talk to Sean. Talk to Sean Enrique.
See, thank you for that. Yes, sorry. Use all the rebate money you can find.
As well as the state, at the state level, does have grants, and they are populating that into the private sector as well. So it's not just public sector funds; they are making available to help with the CBI program. So, other questions?
What a great presentation. Thanks a lot, MacDonald Miller. You again.